So this is the app that I'm going to be talking about today. Just finished, I think. It's called Fugue, and you could play with it out there later tonight if you'd like to. So I'm going to talk about Fugue in a second, but before that, I'm going to talk about myself. I'm a music app developer, electrical engineer, and music maker based here in San Francisco. And quick thank you to everyone at Gray Area, the other presenters, Andrew and Jonathan, and everyone who came out tonight. The event was a welcome pressure to actually finish something, you know. So I'm going to get into Fugue a bit more, but before that I want to talk about these two projects that I've built that are part of Fugue's story. So the left is a hardware project I built called the Chaosinome, and the right is an iOS app, my first iOS app called Arpeggionome. So this is Chaosinome. It's a hardware device with a touchscreen on top of 256 LED grid with 8 rotary knobs / buttons built in a metal and wood enclosure. It's designed to do anything, meaning like you touch the touchscreen, press the knobs, move the buttons, and it sends information to the computer. And then in the computer, you can use software like MaxMSP, Pure Data and Processing to do whatever you want those interactions to do. And then the computer sends information back to the device to control the lights, which hopefully represent what's happening inside the computer. So this is a video of one application I made for Chaosinome. Oop. Nope. Cool. Okay, so that's Chaosinome. I considered creating a Kickstarter for it, but then I thought it would be easier to make a business out of an iPad app instead. So this is our Arpeggionome, and it's an evolution of Chaosinome, and I took that previous application that you just saw and made it into its own 100% dedicated application. And the basic idea is you design this pattern, this arpeggio, with the buttons on the side and the knobs on top, and then you control that arpeggio with the matrix in the center, where moving up and down changes the speed, and moving left and right changes the pitch. And I also made a version for iPhone and a version for Android that I called Arpio. For whatever reason, I changed the name. I'm horrible at naming things. And both of these applications, the Android and the iOS version, were both used. I also used libpd, like Andrew did. And actually, the creator of libpd is here tonight, Peter Brinkman. So I just want to say thank you to him, because could not have done it without you. Okay, so here is here's a video of Arpeggionome in action. So yeah, that's Arpeggionome, and that example, it was actually controlling a synthesizer in GarageBand, or actually a sampler of piano sound. But you could connect it to any synthesizer So that was built since like the 80s, or other apps, other software in your computer, etc. Anyway, so my experience building Arpeggione was just incredible. It's when I fell in love with programming. It's actually where I learned most of my programming skills. And just like being able to focus on one application, like the details of one application for so long, it was just extremely rewarding. So after that, I wondered, what next? And I thought, what's cooler than one arpeggios would be two arpeggios or three arpeggios. So n sequences is greater than one sequence. The sequence can be an arpeggio or a chord or whatever you want the musical sequence to be. So I had this idea that I wanted to do something with more than one sequence. But I didn't want those sequences just to be, I wanted those sequences to be related in some way. Otherwise, you'd just be making another digital workstation or Ableton Live or something like this. So I wanted them to be related, the sequences. But then I thought, related how? And then I thought about some composition techniques I learned in school about fugues. This is Chewbacca. So the very basic idea of a fugue is you start with a melody or a subject. You maybe play it once or twice. And then on the third time, you could bring in a second voice that's related to the first. So that second voice might be the same exact melody as the subject, but maybe transposed down 2 octaves, played in reverse and half the speed or something. Or maybe it's a fifth above and played twice as fast and harmonically inverted. Anyways, so this is an example of a fugue. It's one of Bach's famous fugues. And I'll play a part of it and pay attention to when the second voice comes in, how similar it is to the first, and similarly, the third is going to be very similar as well. Sorry. I could listen to that forever. Oh, man. Okay. So, I hope you heard it. Anyways, so thinking about these two thoughts, related sequences and fugues, led me to the concept of my new application, which I'm calling Fugue. And the basic idea is that it's a magical device that accepts a note sequence. Sequence goes into this magical box and produces multiple variations of the sequence that you can manipulate at the same time. So that was the goal, something like this. And first I want to describe what a sequence is, what I mean by a note sequence. So these white notes are a note sequence, and in the x-axis you have time, and in the y-axis, you have pitch. And you have these other things called a playhead, which moves left to right, and when it passes a note, it'll play the note. So what do I mean by variation now? So like I mentioned before, an example of a variation might be you take this note sequence and flip it and play it in reverse. Or another example might be you play the note sequence twice as fast and an octave above, or something like this. So if you do some crazy operations on a melody, you can get something like this with 4 different operations of that initial melody simultaneously. And as you can see, it gets complex, but as we heard, it could be quite beautiful if you choose that, that sequence well. Anyways, so the next step of this whole thing was to design the interface that would allow me to achieve this thing. And it was the most challenging part of the whole project, to be honest. I've had this idea for a while and approached building it multiple times, but the interface just never felt right. It was the first time I approached the project with a concept and not a UI. Because like the Arpegginome and the Chaosinome projects, I started with this interface and found what could be cool with that interface. It's a very hardware approach. So the goal I was hoping to achieve with this project or with the design was to enable users to experiment with these concepts in an incredibly intuitive way while staying in the moment, like the musical moment. Because previous to this, if I were applying these operations similar to like how it's been done for centuries, you would have to think a lot about it. You'd have to think, you'd have to maybe do some math, write it down, plug it into your digital workstation. And all of this took so much time that, at least for me, I personally couldn't do like in the musical moment. Anyway, I made about 1,000 mocks for this thing over the course of the past year or so. And it was crazy and all over the place. And eventually I just asked myself, what is it, at its most basic level. So I looked at this thing again, essentially, and I asked myself, like, how would I build it under the hood without thinking about the design? And I realized that I could build it with one sequence being read multiple times at once. And then I realized that translated very well to a piano roll with multiple playheads. So it was a technical solution for the design problem, which I thought was pretty cool. So here's our sequence. We have one playhead playing over it. And now if we put more playheads on there, then we can get the same pattern that we were hoping for before in a much cleaner way by playing the playheads at different speeds and different directions and maybe applying some types of transposition for each one. Cool. Okay, so this is the. Can you guys see that well or no? Not really. No. Yes. Maybe. If we could, I'll keep going, but if we could up the brightness on the screen like we did earlier, that would be cool. Anyways, so we have you could see the white notes, which is totally the important part right now. So we have the white notes, and the white notes represent the input sequence. And going back to the graph before, that's the input sequence, so that takes care of that. And then down here, cool. Oh, that's great, thank you. Okay, so inputs, I'll just go over input sequence, blah, 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 flashy, flash, holdy. All right, yeah, okay. And then down here, we have the 4 independent playheads that each one we can control. On the left over here, we have the style, so you could choose the direction. The tempo, you can choose different speeds relative to the master tempo. So times 2, times 4, divided by 2, divided by 4. And each one, you also have choices for the dotted and triplet tempo values. And keep going to the right, we can change where we start along this loop. Invert is a harmonic inversion, which is essentially flipping things vertically instead of horizontally. And octave and pitch, you can control transposition, and velocity, you can control the loudness of each playhead. So going back to this this box thing, that all of those playhead parameters represent these guys down here. Cool. All right, so this will be an example of this particular pattern being played by one playhead. All right, and up next we'll have the same pattern being played by 4 playheads. And let's just listen to that. I've played with this thing like for 5 months straight. I swear I'm going crazy, but it still sounds good to me. Cool. So I'm gonna jump into a demo if I have time in a second. But before I do, I want to just give a little insight on like the whole timeline of this project, because it's still a mystery to me why these things take so long to make. And I was hoping, for myself even, that preparing these next slides would shed some light on that process, but I don't know if it actually did. We'll find out. Okay. So the project started on January 1st as part of the Cultural Incubator Program here at Gray Area, like Pierre mentioned before. And then by February, this was actually the end of January, but for the graph's sake, I put it as February. I had a functioning prototype that worked really well, actually. And this is what it looked like then on the left. And as you can see, it looks very similar to where the app is now. And it honestly worked very well for 95% of use cases. So what exactly did I spend these 5 extra months doing, right? And why not release early and iterate is what some of my San Francisco friends ask me often. All right, so to answer that question, let's go back over here to the timeline and move forward a little bit since we have it. And so to answer the first question is, what was I doing over those 5 months? Most of that time was spent optimizing the code. I can dive into many things here, but I think most notable was the sequencer's effect on the CPU in this crazy corner case that no one would ever do, right? If you put 8,000 notes on the piano roll, and you have the playheads playing at maybe 8 times the master tempo, which is at 300 BPM, it sounds insane, you know? No one in their right mind would do it unless like a super cool artist in the future, I don't know. Anyways, and similarly, this same situation also stressed the GPU in a crazy way, because the initial version that I built this app with, or the version at the end of January, each one of these notes was its own like view object in code. So without diving into like too much code, which may have been a good idea considering the audience tonight, I'm just proud to say that the CPU now in this situation maxes out at like 30% on an older iPad, and I completely redesigned the piano roll to work with just one object. So the GPU is much happier with dealing with one object compared to 8,000, which is pretty cool. I'm proud of that. All right. All right, cool. All right, oh my God. All right, one other thing I spent a lot of time on is this MIDI sequencer timing. This is also in the crazy situation. So on the left, okay, how did I describe this? All right, on the left we have MIDI notes from Fugue being recorded into a different software application, right? So it's actually being recorded by Ableton Live, if you're familiar. And on the top we have the before, and the bottom we have the after. And these notes are 128th notes at 300 BPM, and that's about like 6 milliseconds per note, like super crazy fast. But as you can see in the before compared to the after, it's a lot cleaner now, right? Like the precision is I could sleep at night, I guess I could say. And if it works this well at these crazy rates, then thankfully it's going to work super well at a more reasonable rate. So one other thing that I spent my time on in those 5 months was the design and interaction details. So one of the coolest things I implemented in this time was piano roll gestures to make the piano roll actually usable at when you're zoomed out, right? Because if you zoom out, those notes are like maybe 10 pixels tall, maybe even smaller, and And now you can do like cool things like 2 fingers. In this case, I have the shift button, so you're copying them, but you could use 2 fingers to move things around, 3 fingers to change note length, and use a little selection window to choose the ones you want to affect. So that's cool. And then I completely redesigned the playhead parameters here to make more sense for what it was actually doing for each one. So you could see like the tempo, start, octave, and pitch knobs are still knobs like they used to be, but the invert is more of an interactive switch like it should be. Velocity has these 2 parameters, so you can flip velocity, and the style just shows you the 4 options that you have in a much more visible way. Cool. So, yeah. And then I could go on and on about all the things I did, and I really want to, but I know it gets really boring very quickly. But I think the more interesting question might be, why not release early and iterate? And this is kind of funny, but I'm not a businessman at all, and I used this picture too, which is the same meme as Jonathan. So when it comes to making business decisions, I have no idea what I'm doing. So for me, I was hoping to have a much more articulate answer to this question, but for me, it's really that it just doesn't feel right to release something early. For me, it would be like releasing a musical album before it was finished, and then re-releasing it when I thought it was a little better. Which may explain why I've never actually released officially released music before, but that's that's another issue altogether. Okay, and then for the end user, it doesn't feel right also, because it feels like it feels wrong just changing things out from a dedicated user, and those are your most important users. And in an extreme example, it would be like if you played violin for 10 years, and then all of a sudden the guy who invented the violin knocks on your door, takes your violin, replaces it with a cello, and says, "This is a violin now." And it just doesn't feel right. I mean, that's an extreme example, I know. Okay, so another reason why is these deep bugs start to present themselves when you work with the app like this long. And I think it's incredibly important for a real-time piece of software to minimize that user anxiety. I'm sure many of you in this room have the experience of, maybe Ableton Live crashing when you're in the moment, or Logic, or, video program, and that feeling is awful. And the next time you open that application, you have this anxiety, you don't trust it. It's like this very strange relationship that I feel is really important, to be mindful of, I guess. I don't know. And lastly, solid apps are the best apps. So that's my excuse for taking 6 months. All right, now it's July, and I actually think I'm ready to launch, so that's kind of cool. And I'm pretty sure I mean it. Thank you. And I think we have time for a demo. Is that cool? Yeah? Yes? All right, yes. Okay, well, now officially, demo. So we got these notes in the center. I could delete them, maybe. Why not? And add them again. And then you have these playheads at the bottom. And let's see, let's start just at 1 here. And let's say I want to play it in reverse. Or maybe reverse and forward. So it'll come back now. All right, then we can affect the tempo in crazy ways. Maybe go twice as fast. 4 times. Okay, now I'm just showing off. All right, so let's go to these other parameters here. Maybe drop it down an octave. Bye.